one of the students reached out afterwards, and I highly encourage everyone to think about this as what it can actually mean to just be proactive, because he reached out, and we met for coffee. He wanted to understand how we could apply the blockchain to the cannabis industry, right? I don't know if anybody is paying attention, but cannabis was legalized as a medical option in Ohio. It's definitely on that path nationally, and hemp was legalized as a commodity in 2018 in December. So hemp is it's cannabis, which is also marijuana, but what differentiates it is that marijuana has THC that's above 0.03%. And so this particular student, he has a brother that was having seizures, and that hemp, the CBD, and there's a particular strain that helped him after nothing else would. And it was hugely problematic because he couldn't get more of this. It was not standardized. There was no way of getting what was preventing his brother from having multiple seizures a day. Just because there's no standard for it. So what we've done is, so he and I, he actually founded a company, and I've built out technology for him to integrate with laboratories that are measuring what they call cannabinoids. They're different substances that are in this plant, and measuring those different levels, and then certifying that particular strain as having those specific chemical properties. And so we've created a standard for this where there wasn't one. And it's technology that could revolutionize, and I would say that is probably in the process of revolutionizing this whole industry. And it's interesting, he was a student in here just like you guys, and it's amazing because we live in a world where there are so many things that are possible, and it's exponentially increasing. There are opportunities everywhere, and everything is accelerating so fast, and there are ways that you can get involved in that process, and you can create solutions that make a real difference in the world. There are so many applications for this, and we're really just scratching the surface.
Okay, so let's say that somebody, I'm just trying to understand this, let's say somebody builds a new blockchain or a new blockchain, who pays them? If a block of one Bitcoin for $9,000, who's paying them?
Well, someone else who sees the value of it. So the way that is, the Bitcoin is created by the miner who actually mines it. And what they're doing when they actually mine that is they're storing all of the other transactions that are going on in the world. So if you and I are, we have an exchange of Bitcoins, right? We send that transaction into the Bitcoin network, and then it gets stored in that block. So that all those transactions, my transaction, your transaction, everybody else's, gets stored in that one block, right? So the dollars come into play. It's really with the exchange of value, because I could have paid you, for a service, right, in Bitcoin, or you could have paid me dollars, and I exchanged Bitcoin for that. So it's an exchange of value, and it's true that value is reflected in dollars to the degree that other people are willing to pay you X dollars for that Bitcoin. So that's where the dollars come into the equation. It's just like any other commodity. What makes the blockchain and Bitcoin special is that it provides that mechanism to establish the value, right? That's where the power of it really comes in.
Is there a bidding process that
Yes.
Ratchets the price up or down?
Yes, it's just like any other market. Yeah, there are Bitcoin markets out there, several, and it's an exchange. It's just like the commodity exchange, right? You guys ever seen people putting up paper and Yeah, and it's like it's the same model. It's just taking that from this antiquated, the way we've done it for hundreds of years before we had computers, and now we're doing the same thing, but it's all digital.
Well, is commodities trading done through blockchain now?
Yes, it is being done, through those paper mechanisms. It's being done digitally, and it's being done through the blockchain. Because people are recognizing that is a safe way of storing those transactions.
And Carly, were you also asking like how does the Bitcoin get paid to the miner?
No.
Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Is like the end game for like a cryptocurrency to transform from like a commodity towards like an actual currency? Because like right now, like I couldn't just go into a store and buy something with a Bitcoin.
You can, depending on the store.
Well, yeah, but
Target.
Target, yeah. Right. What if I want to go to Target and get like shampoo? Like it's just not like it's not practical like yet. So like,
Well,
what's like the
Yeah.
what's the hurdle? Like is it public perception? Is it like policy? Is it?
It's just adoption, right? So like there are lots of places you can go and like there are areas in New York where you can like every store accepts crypto. Like, it's just it depends on where you are and what you're doing.
Are there people who are just traders in Bitcoin?
Yes,
Buy low, sell high?
very much so. Yeah, there are people doing like just exactly that. Doing day trading, doing like every manner of investment. Like the way that people trade anything, they're doing the same kinds of things with Bitcoin. It's very interesting. Yeah.
So from your end, coding a project or something, is that from, or what does your interface look like? Is it like a whole program you can pull up and then type that in, or I'm just confused on that part.
Yeah, so at the core of it is non-visual, right? Like, so the core of any of these things are not, there's not necessarily a user interface. There is what we call an API, which is it's an application programming interface, but it's for computers to communicate over. But yeah, we build interfaces for all kinds of different things. So yeah, I mean, if you're interested, I could show you different projects that we've got going. I think it really depends on the use case, right? Because there's a big difference between tracking like the exchange of coins, right, versus contributing value to try to improve the world or to generate graphene or so it's the user interface is completely customized to what you're actually trying to do. So yeah, it completely depends. But yeah, the way we build everything is very, very flexible. So it can be applied pretty much any way you want to.
For if you're gonna coding like a blockchain, what kind of computer language gonna use like for now?
What language would you program in?
Yeah, so like Java or Python or
Yeah, I mean you could use pretty much anything. I think probably most of them are using. I don't even want to say that because they're like you would be amazed. Just if you're really interested, just go look on like GitHub. Just do a search on open source cryptocurrencies. You're going to be shocked. There in any language you want, really, someone is doing it. We write all of ours in JavaScript, so every aspect of it we write in JavaScript from top to bottom. But so like the core, some of the core technologies we use, some of it's written in Rust, some of it was written in Java, some of it was written in, I think some of it was written in like Go. So you would be amazed, just amazed. The very first, so when I met Neil, the one that we were using, we were actually writing it in C. So, no, don't look that up. That was 20 years ago. Don't. If you're really interested, just go look around. Like there are so many open source projects, you could just dig in and start playing around with it. You don't have to do it from scratch. There's so many people that have invested so much time in this. And if you're really interested, reach out to me because I can show you all kinds of stuff.
Okay. Another thing I was interested in was with like Drop Me's house, you were taking all this data. So I'm assuming you were there taking pictures, photos, putting it onto the database. How does that then, is that your program then that's doing all this stats and like coming out with all these
Yeah.
outcomes?
Yeah. Yeah, and it was pretty complex how it was all working. And again, it was rudimentary. Like, we were pioneering some of these concepts. This was before Bitcoin. So like Bitcoin came out in 2008. That was when they published the paper. So this was what, 9 years before that, right? No, you said 99.
Yeah. I was oblivious to that there was anything involved besides four guys and two ladders
Mm.
and a beam.
Yeah.
That's all I knew about.
And some papers, because I remember so this is actually a really interesting piece of it. So actually Neil, so we were documenting time actually on paper, right? Because it doesn't, at that time, it didn't make any sense to bring a device in there to record the time, because you just couldn't really, there wasn't a good option. So we were actually using paper to record the time. So people were going, we had every guy who was working in there, they would write down when they started, what they were working on, what the exact task was, and then they would write the time when they were done. So I mean, that's
totally unaware that they had any sort of a system behind it.
sure.
Yeah.
But then we were taking those papers and we were inputting them into our system. And yeah, you're right, we were taking pictures, we were taking measurements, we were adding those into the system. So, then there were two different phases. There was the estimation and then the work. So, they were handled separately. Like I would go in and do the estimation. So I'd go in, I'd take the original estimates, take the measurements, do all of that stuff. I'd put it in the system, and we were continuously tweaking the algorithms to do the actual estimate for the work, because it's different for every kind of work. And then the guys that were actually doing the work, they would be entering all their time into these different sheets that we were then mapping to each task. So then when we put it in the system, that's where it would translate all of it.
Before you run out of time, talk
Yeah.
about the energy intensity
Yes,
of this
thank you.
process.
So one of the really ironic things is that people are using the blockchain I'd say sustainability is one of the leading areas where this is being used. It's, because it has such good application there. Unfortunately, so Bitcoin itself, they're using the constraints of computing power as the mechanism for enforcing scarcity. So what that means is that it takes more and more and more energy to unlock each of these blocks. So the energy consumption of Bitcoin itself is astronomical. I mean, it is insane. And not only that, every year, the equipment that is top of the line one year is obsolete the next year. So it's, as a sustainability model, Bitcoin itself is not the solution, right? The Bitcoin version of the blockchain is incredibly inefficient. It is also not scalable at all. They've computed that it has a universal limit on the number of transactions that can be made globally at 7 transactions per second, which that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable in any way at all, really. But the beauty of Bitcoin itself is that it demonstrated this model to the world, and it opened the door for other technologies. That's the thing about technology, is we are always coming up with better ways of doing things. Constantly. We're constantly improving things. And that's the same thing of sustainability, because what you're really doing is you're finding better ways of doing things that have less negative outcomes, right? And so, we've, since 2009, so many different techniques have been innovated on. I mean, it's continuing to evolve all the time. And so like the technology that we use, it uses almost no electricity, right? But it still has all the benefits of the blockchain. So it's very important when you implement something to really understand what it is, and there are going to be pros and cons for every technology. And there are going to be some use cases where something works really well, but in a different use case, something else is better. So that's what I would really encourage you to think about when you're trying to solve any problem. The better you can understand the pros and cons of various alternatives, the better you're going to be suited to actually solve the problem in a way that has minimal negative outcomes.
So I was just also thinking about this concept called smart contracts. And especially in the world of sustainability, when you're going to be perhaps working in corporate social responsibility divisions within different companies, or that's going to be a big concern of yours. So imagine there's a contract or an agreement where every time you purchase something, they'll plant 4 trees. So I mean, there's a way of using the blockchain in a beautiful way to maintain transparency with all those promises. So I mean, I don't know if you want to speak more to that.
I feel like you covered it pretty well.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, so I think the idea behind that is that it becomes very easy. Like when if we're using Visa or, just a typical way of exchanging something, you don't really have much control over the details of how it's involved. You've got transaction fees that are just built into it, and it just is what it is. But some of these techniques allow you to do really innovative things like that. So if you wanted to dictate that every transaction is going to mean that there are 4 more trees planted in the world, that's something that can very easily be done. And you can also, you could redirect part of the transaction towards a charity or towards like anything you can think of. So I mean, it opens the door for all kinds of different possibilities that didn't exist until now. You have this very flexible set of technologies that you can use for all kinds of things. Did you still have a question? You did a second.
Yeah, it's like not related to that, but I was just wondering with the Bitcoin in particular, is the ability to like make a transaction with someone else dependent on another person's ability to like encrypt? I don't even really understand how like the Bitcoins are generated, but is that like, are those two things linked together? So as it becomes harder to like generate new Bitcoins, does it mean that there's fewer transactions that can happen?
No.
Okay.
So there are natural limitations to the number of transactions that can happen, but that doesn't inherently stop those transactions. It just means it takes longer for them to get recorded, and that's only Bitcoin. So I don't want anybody to get hung up on that, because that's one model. There are much better models. And so like for just as an example, our technology that we use, it actually gets exponentially more efficient the more people that are using it. So the more transactions that are happening, every one of them, every new participant increases the efficiency of our system. So it's actually the opposite of like, so whereas Bitcoin has some built-in throttling and some ceilings that are built in from the beginning, there are all kinds of other techniques that don't have those limitations at all.
I ran in today to an application of cryptocurrency that surprised me. We're going to be visiting a place, those of you going to Chicago, where there was a fee that had to be paid, and they sent me this invoice to pay, and one of the options for paying was by cryptocurrency. I mean, this is a small nonprofit in Chicago. I chose Visa, but just to see cryptocurrency offered as a way to pay suggested this is becoming more commonplace than I realized.
Yeah, and it really speaks to your point. It may not be that case in Columbus, Ohio, but I assure you that there are lots of places you can walk right in and use cryptocurrency to buy all kinds of stuff. And it'll be soon in Columbus, Ohio. Columbus it's a very interesting place. We're actually pretty forward in some ways. It's just that we're not at the leading edge in those things.
So like, let's say you have one cryptocurrency and like and another person has another. You can't trade those.
You can. Yeah, there are exchanges that are designed specifically for that. So like in the same way that Bitcoin has like a US dollar translation or a euro translation, it also has a translation for Ethereum or for any all kinds of other cryptocurrencies too. So I mean, it's just like any kind of like economic thing. There are lots and lots of people that are stepping in to they see an opportunity to create value. Like you had this idea, you had a thought. Well, why can't I trade one cryptocurrency for another? There are lots of people that have had that thought and that have already solved it. So yeah, I mean there's this whole phenomenon actually where people are specifically making coins that that they will only trade for other coins. So it's a very interesting world that we are living in. It's pretty fascinating.
In reference to specifically blockchains that sort of have this competitive model, so Bitcoin otherwise, have there been any regulations, federal or other, to sort of stop when it seems like it's work for the sake of work and consumption for the sake of consumption? That it seems like an unsustainable model. So I'm wondering if there have been any
That's a
regulations.
great question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'd be very curious. You know, I would think that that would actually make sense in a lot of countries that do make that a priority. To my knowledge, I don't think the U.S. is one of them that has imposed anything, but you never know. You know, there's a lot going on in the world, and things change really quick. So I don't know.
Is there an international body that regulates cryptocurrencies or not?
Not to my knowledge. Seems like there should be. But you know, it's how do you regulate something that is decentralized too? You know, so
I mean,
it becomes
maybe
a
the
tricky.
options for fraud are so limited that it's not needed.
Yeah, I mean, it provides its own mechanism for that piece of it.
It's self-enforcing.
Yeah, but you know, you have like these exchanges that, like, so no one has cracked Bitcoin, but people have cracked the exchanges. Like, people have hacked many of the exchanges. So there have been all of these places where, you know, people have invested money, and then people have hacked into the underlying exchange and stolen cryptocurrency from the exchange, right? You know, so the cryptocurrency itself is extremely secure, but you know, it's like, well, you get anybody who is trying to figure out how to work something and manipulate it. People are very, very resourceful. So I mean, it's still a need, and I don't know if anybody has stepped up to kind of address any of that. Anybody else? Well, cool. Hopefully you learned something.
When we wrapped up the last class, I asked the question, and it'd be interesting to see what you say. You know, these guys are out working someplace. What sort of situations might they encounter where a bell should go off that says, hey, maybe a blockchain is applicable here?
Yeah.
What would be the features of that situation?
I love that question. Okay, so the things that stand out as something that the blockchain is applicable for, is a good use case for, would be any place where there is uncertainty or instability. So I would say, you know, in a lot of cases where, say, there is not a central authority that people feel is trustworthy. So you know, that's why it's so big for international kinds of like shipping and, you know, different exchanges like that, because a lot of the time there's no intermediary that people consider to be trustworthy. So any place that you don't have a trust factor, that's a really good use case for the blockchain, because it enforces that. It provides a foundation to enforce that trust. I would also say any place where people don't necessarily, like if there's sensitive data that's involved that they don't want to make accessible to, you know, say that central, like they don't want to put it up on a server. They don't necessarily want to expose that sensitive information. That's another really good use case for the blockchain. I would say places where there are where it's difficult to oversee complex transactions that are happening in different locations. So you still have to enforce. So like, I'll just use the example of shipping again, because it's a really easy one. You know, so one of the real common use cases for the blockchain is they'll put say a shipping container, and they'll put a little tracking beacon inside of that container that will flag every time the container is open, right? You know, so it might have a GPS in it, so it can track exactly where that container is over time, and it's continuously storing that information, right? So there are a lot of different ways that can be done, but the blockchain provides a really uniquely powerful way to do that because you can also send that signal out, you know, in a way that it's still secure. You're also storing it locally, but you're also putting it onto a network. So it gives you this, it's a well-designed mechanism for tracking that thing across regions that you don't have control over, right? You know, so if, say, it goes through customs that you don't have any, you know, there's no way to know what is actually going on there, but this gives you a way of, even though you don't have control in that particular region, you still have continuity across its path, you know, no matter what happened in between, you know, as long as the circumstance that you don't want to have happen, which in this case is for the crate to be opened, right? So any kind of use case like that. So like any supply chain related situations, any place where you want to enforce the validity or like to certify something, those are all really, really good use cases for the blockchain.
Have you seen any speculation about how blockchain could have helped with the management of this virus?
I have not seen anything, but I can think of a lot of ways that it could be used. You know, you could, you could help to enforce, say, like quarantines. You know, I mean, not to get, I mean, the reality is if you're wanting to prevent the spread of a virus, you have to quarantine different regions. So, you know, that's a pretty complex perimeter. You know, like it's complex to try to monitor something like that, and you've got so many different data points that you're trying to keep track of. So I mean, that would be a good use case for the blockchain because you can monitor all of that activity, and you could collect it in a non-central way and merge it with other data that will allow you to enforce the integrity of the data across all the different sets. So that's actually a really, that would be a good use case for it. You could also use it to certify and monitor the distribution of, you know, I know lots of people are trying to develop vaccines, you know, so certifying the vaccines and certifying where they're delivered and how much quantity, and to ensure that it's not being tampered with or diluted, or, you know, people trying to forge it, you know, so there are a lot of use cases like that. I would say certification and validation, those are the most powerful use cases for it. Okay?
Seems like we wore everybody out.
Woo!